Right. So let's look at Europe, because in 2014, this was a major turning point in Europe because you had these tens of millions of refugees trying to escape these wars in the Middle East, created by America's wars in the Middle East. And they were trying to reach Europe. And at this point, Europe had a choice. It could choose to close its borders and maintain its cultural identity, or it could open the floodgates. And Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, she said something really, really famous, and which stuck in my mind, which is, we can do this. We are Europeans. Somehow we can take in these millions of refugees and welcome them into our societies and thrive as a people. And the complete opposite has happened. You've got millions of these refugees who fled into Europe, not because of their choice, by the way, but because their nations were devastated, right? Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq were all devastated in these wars against terror in the Middle East. So they go, and these are proud Islamists. They love their religion, they love their family, they love their community, and so they're not going to absorb themselves and assimilate themselves into Europe. And today, you're looking at population replacement in a lot of cities. You go to certain places in Britain, and you might think you are in Cairo or Baghdad, and this has caused tremendous conflict throughout Europe. I wouldn't be surprised if like 2 to 4 years time, you have civil war break out, insurgencies break out in places like Britain and France. So the question is, why is this happening throughout the world at the same time?
Exactly.
Why is it that these different nations, whether they're European, whether they're Canadian or Australian, why are they adopting the same policies? Not just in terms of COVID, right? But also in terms of like immigration. And so that's one of the great questions that we have to ask about the world we live in today. It seems as though it's almost a controlled demolition of Western civilization, right? The Anglosphere, Western Europe. It seems as though these nations are being destroyed purposely. For what end? I don't know. But I would just say there's a certain pattern that has emerged, and the result can only end up in the controlled demolition of these societies. Right. So you look at what's happening in Ukraine, where the war is lost. It was lost 2 years ago. The Ukrainians have lost over 1 million fighting men. A lot of their people have fled overseas. No matter what happens in this war, Ukraine is finished as a nation state. It is no longer viable as a nation state. And rather than admit defeat and come to a ceasefire with Putin, what the Europeans are doing is they're saying that we're going to draft our men and have them fight in the trenches of Ukraine, which would be suicide because the Russians dominate the battlefield with their drones and artillery and trenches in Ukraine. So it's almost like a suicide mission. But not only that, but the Germans have said that, okay, we can only draft German men, but not Islamic men, because we're afraid of their loyalty, which means that you have a situation where, local men like British, French, German men are being sent to die in the trenches of Ukraine. And, back at home, you have these immigrant population that have not assimilated into your culture. So it's a really weird strategy. And I don't know who comes up with these with this sort of stuff. And look, there's no historical precedent for this. There just isn't. I mean, there's been incidents of mass immigration. You go back to the fall of the Roman Empire and how these hordes of immigrants flooded the Romans. And it's almost impossible to assimilate so many people. Eventually, there's going to be a cultural takeover. Eventually, with so many people who are insistent on maintaining their cultural identity, eventually, because they have more children than you, eventually they're going to overwhelm your cultural identity.